History Inside a Nutshell, the show where we sail into our port of call discussing maritime history. The maiden voyage of the RMS Titanic. The RMS Titanic is arguably the most recognised ocean liner in maritime history. The story of her only voyage has been remembered for the wrong reasons. This led to unfortunate consequences, and her sinking became a night to remember. When people begin to talk about Titanic, the discussions and countdowns start on the 10th of April each year. But why is this talked about? Are people excited about it? The answers all lies in this video. The story begins on the 2nd of April 1912 when the Titanic began her sea trials at Belfast. Belonging to the White Star Line, the Titanic was built at the Harland and Wolff shipyard, where she became the second out of the 3 liners known as the Olympic class. She was launched in 1911, but her final construction and dates for her maiden voyage had been pushed back by her older sister, the Olympic. Her sea trials were also pushed back by 1 day. Despite this, she had completed the trials on the 2nd of April and gained a certificate entitled An Agreement and Account of Voyages and Crew. At 8 p.m, Titanic, under the command of Captain Herbert Haddock, sailed out from Belfast, arriving at Southampton docks 28 hours later on the 4th of April. There, she was towed into berth 44. The Titanic would lay in her berth for 6 days. Her timing couldn't have been worse, as a series of disruptions had occurred. This included a coal strike, a change in crew, and a transfer of passengers from other liners. On top of that, some of the second-class staterooms and areas were incomplete, and the Titanic had been having technical issues. During her time at Southampton, Thomas Andrews inspected the ship, making adjustments and drafting notes in case the ship needed upgrades or changes following the maiden voyage. Marconi wireless operators Jack Phillips and Harold Bride were also on board. Having been with Titanic since Belfast, the men spent their time ashore to keep themselves occupied. It's reported that Jack Phillips made a day trip to Cowes on the Isle of Wight in splendid weather conditions on the 5th of April. Officers kept watch on the ship at night. One was David Blair, who was dismissed before the Titanic left Southampton. On the 9th of April, Maurice Clark, an emigration officer for the Board of Trade, inspected the ship for a final time before he signed her off, passing her safety regulation exams. At 6 a.m. on the 10th of April, Thomas Andrews and various crew members boarded the Titanic. Captain Edward J. Smith came aboard at 7:30 a.m. Doctors inspected crew members to make sure that they were fit for sailing, and there was a lifeboat drill witnessed by Clark and White Star Marine Superintendent Captain Benjamin Steele. During the drill, the lifeboats were lowered into the water and rowed around the waterfront for a couple of turns before returning to the ship. Later in the day, passengers arrived at the docks, with most arriving in the boat trains from London Waterloo Station, which took them to the berth. Other passengers arrived from hotels nearby where they stayed overnight. This included the Southwestern Hotel, where J. Bruce Ismay, the chairman of the White Star Line, and his family stayed before departure day. While there was excitement to go on board, some passengers had ill feelings about the voyage. This included May Futrell and Esther Hart. When May Futrell boarded the Titanic with her husband, she asked him, in case of trouble, who do they save first? Humorously, May's husband, Jacques, replied, they save the first-class passengers. At noon, the Titanic blew her whistle and began her departure. As she turned to the River Test, Titanic's propellers created a giant suction which forced another liner, the New York, to drift towards her. Because of the force, eyewitnesses recall the sound of gunshots when the New York's moorings snapped. Luckily, the Titanic and New York managed to avoid a collision thanks to the assistance of the tugboat Falcon, but some of the passengers thought that the near collision was a bad omen. The New York had been taken to the other side of the River Test by 2 tugboats before the Titanic resumed her journey. She left Southampton in the early afternoon at a speed of 20 knots. Later that day, the ship would arrive in Cherbourg before making her final port of call in Queenstown on the 11th. On the night of the 14th and in the early morning of the 15th of April, the Titanic collided with an iceberg in the North Atlantic Ocean and sank with a loss of over 1,500 lives. The story of the Titanic's maiden voyage in Southampton would be a journey that would end in disaster. While there wasn't a full prediction, it was clear that the ship was doomed from the start. Today, Southampton Docks is still a working port and the public isn't allowed to visit Berth 44. But in 1993, the British Titanic Society erected a memorial plaque near the site, where it can be still seen today at the Vaux Memorial Gardens. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe for future videos. Until next time, this has been History Inside a Nutshell, departing from the docks. Thank you so much for all of your support and enjoy the rest of your voyage.